When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof, like Aloe or Allbirds, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and great marketing. But an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the business, making selling, and for shoppers, buying, simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Nobody does online business better than Shopify. It's home of Shop Pay, the #1 checkout in the world. You can use it to boost conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going through to checkout. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/income, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/income to upgrade your selling today. That's shopify.com/income.
Imagine this. The best pasta sauce you have ever tasted sits abandoned on a plate. Wasted sauce. That is a tragedy. If only you had used Barilla al Bronzo pasta. Its bronze-cut texture holds your sauce and scoops up every last drop. The Italians call that scarpetta. Capture sauce the Italian way. Barilla al Bronzo. Click or tap the banner to find out more.
Hey guys, have you heard of Goldbelly? It's this amazing site where they ship the most iconic famous foods from restaurants across the country, anywhere, nationwide. I've never found a more perfect gift than food. They ship Chicago deep dish pizza, New York bagels, Maine lobster rolls, and even Ina Garten's famous cakes. So if you're looking for a gift for the food lover in your life, head to goldbelly.com and get 20% off your first order with promo code GIFT.
Hello, mega orderers. It may seem a moment of maximum disorder, but fear not. Our dear brother leader has just informed us that he has proclaimed the everlasting ceasefire between Iran and Israel to come into effect 6 hours from now. Hence, Arthur and I have taken to give you this emergency cast at 11:31 p.m. British Summer Time. Arthur, I am reminded of the famous quote from Lenin. There are decades when weeks happen, and there are weeks when decades happen.
We're definitely having one of those weeks.
It is one of those weeks. So just in case you've been living underneath a rock and need to be brought slightly up to speed, on Saturday evening American time, President Trump announced that B-2 bombers had dropped MOPs, massive ordnance penetrators, on Fordow, Esfahan, and Natanz. Whether they destroyed their ability to enrich uranium or not is anyone's guess. I'm interested to know your thoughts there, Arthur. And today, during the day, we have seen a very symbolic Iranian retaliation, an attack the El Udeid base in Qatar, an American Air Force base, where no personnel were injured, and there seems to have been advanced warning given to the Americans. And there may have been American advanced warning given to the Iranians prior to their nuclear facilities being hit. So a lot of choreography. You're someone who has worked in the diplomatic and military worlds. How do you read where we are at?
Well, let's go back to the moment the Americans joined in. Clearly, everybody became an expert on Fordow, a mountain with an underground bunker which required a certain type of bunker-busting bomb. Only America has the bomb. So then America would carry out the strike. Trump said he would take 2 weeks and then did it the following day. So that was obviously to catch the Iranians unawares. Now, in the immediate aftermath, both Trump and Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, announced that it had been a staggering success. We talked about the obliteration, the total destruction of the Iranian nuclear program. It's very clear that that didn't happen. You had Israel carrying out further strikes on Fordow today being the 23rd of June. You have J.D. Vance rowing back on those initial statements and sort of saying, well, we don't know exactly how much damage has been done. And we have the fact that nobody actually knows where the rather significant 400 kilograms of highly enriched uranium is. It may not have been in Fordow. After all,
It's in my basement, Arthur.
well, had to be somewhere, right? I'm glad you got it. No, but I mean, everyone on planet Earth, or certainly anyone who was interested in Iran, knew about Fordow and knew that it was going to be hit with a bunker-busting bomb. So probably the Iranians who work at Fordow also knew that, and they might have all cleared off.
And they were probably told that they were going to be hit, and all the Russian scientists who were helping them there were very, very nicely expatriated back to Moscow.
Yeah. So how much has actually been hit is a serious question. Now, from what I understand, and I certainly am not an expert on enriching uranium, but centrifuges are very, very delicate. So even if, they weren't directly hit, if there's been the kind of the blast wave from a bomb or whatever, they're probably severely damaged. But it seems very clear that the Iranian nuclear program has not been destroyed. The next thing that seems clear to me is that whilst honestly, I don't think I know what Trump's objective is, and he may not know. We do, I think, now have a very clear idea that Israel's objective is regime change. They're
Really?
bombing the political prison. They're trying to, they've gone way beyond just bombing nuclear targets.
But would that really work? Because as I understood it, they killed the very people who would want to do the regime change.
Well, I think the idea is they bomb the gateway and then everyone rushes out. I mean, I don't think it's worked, but the point is that they are going far, far beyond merely targeting the nuclear program.
Oh, God, that's such a mistake, Arthur. As we write this, I'm working on a piece for the Boston Globe, which, of course, is going to have to be re-edited. But my argument would be, restrain Netanyahu, say, we'll help you on the actual denuclearization of Iran, not the sham denuclearization of Iran.
Yeah.
But you can't keep bombing trying to make regime change. It didn't work in Iraq. It didn't work in Afghanistan. And aerially, it didn't work in Libya because that's the analogy. It's an aerial regime change.
Without, no boots on the ground. Yeah.
I think that there is a case that Trump's instincts are actually right here. And, we promised to call balls and strikes in this podcast, and I hate being in a position to have to support Trump. But over Netanyahu, he's probably right. You can't be going maximally for regime change. Why would the Israelis ever think to make that miscalculation?
Yeah, it's very interesting, isn't it? I mean, I think, briefly on Trump, I genuinely don't think he knows what he wants, because he has talked about total surrender. He's said, make Iran great again, which that suggested it's a regime change. But equally, this evening, he's announced peace, which is good to hear. And certainly, as we all know, the MAGA movement is very down on foreign wars. And in fact, even what Trump has done so far has caused a bit of a rift. You've got Tucker Carlson and Steve Bannon very unhappy, and others who are very happy. I think, though, going back to Netanyahu, I think there is a degree to which Netanyahu has a slightly sort of messianic sense of his own destiny, maybe a sort of Churchillianism, that he wants to be not just a great prime minister, but he wants to be the prime minister of Israel that brought down the Islamic Republic.
But ironically, if he was just the prime minister who defeated the Iranian threat and denuclearized it while defeating their proxies,
that would seem like enough, wouldn't it?
That would not only be a great thing, but it would be like Nixon going to China, in the sense that Nixon was a corrupt scumbag. We all know this. We have not just the Watergate tapes, but we know how he treated his staff and held conferences from his toilet and whatever. But he went to China and he did certain things. So there is a case to be made that when it comes to foreign policy, Nixon can't.
He had a vision and an ability to,
And I want to say about Netanyahu, I loathe the man, right? And I have the street chops. I have articles going back to the 1990s in my college newspaper expressing my loathing for him. But he had a maximalist view about the Iranian threat regionally to Israel. He is closer to defeating it now than at any point in Israeli history. Why can't he just take his win and bugger off and get off his corruption cases and not push it?
Well, it's a great point. I mean, I think, we have to recognize, I will happily put my hand up and say how wrong I was. I did not think Israel could both take on Hamas and neutralize the threat from Hezbollah. Now, one could argue that they failed against Hamas, so certainly they're still fighting in Gaza. In fact, only in the last few days, there's been escalation of violence in Gaza, which suggests their campaign there is not working. But the campaign against Hezbollah has worked. I mean, if Hezbollah was ever going to rise up, it would be right now, and they haven't.
And they even said that they won't.
Yeah. And you've had the Houthis sort of rattling their sabers, but they're so far off that although, of course, they can reach Ben Gurion Airport, but the ability of the Houthis to strike at Israel is still relatively limited. And yeah, Iran, if the nuclear program has well and truly been scuttled, then actually Iran's ability to threaten Israel is seriously reduced. And that, as you say, should be the win for Netanyahu. But I think he has, beyond his politics and beyond his cynicism, beyond his corruption and the court cases he might face, I think he has a kind of vision for himself as this transformational leader. So my sense is that Israel is pushing for regime change and will continue to do so.
Well, that frightens me. I mean, a lot of this frightens me. Whenever the markets don't respond or they do the opposite of what you think is reasonable, I get worried. I'm not someone who watches the market, right? I'm not much of an investor. I don't do day trading. I don't really understand the markets. But if Iran attacks an American airbase and the markets go up rather than down, I'm worried. Like something is just wrong, right?
Yeah.
And this unsettles me because it points to what is called groupthink. And I think that we've seen a lot of groupthink. Maybe there is a groupthink. And I thought Netanyahu, as sinister as he might be, would be better than this, which is that it's not messianism so much, but Israel can be liberationist in a neocon, spread democracy, Wolfowitz and Feith kind of way.
Yeah.
But it's been 25 years and we know we know that it doesn't work. Whereas a much harder nose, ArchCon, I said these Iranians are bad mofos, and they trained the Hamas people who killed our citizens and kept them hostage. And now we're going to work with our allies, the Qataris and the Saudis, to restrain them and keep them in a box. And we're not going to administer Gaza because we can't occupy Muslims and Palestinians because it just makes them hate Jews. We're done. We're washing our hands. Game over, please. I have to believe that some kind of saner heads would prevail at this moment. After the break, Arthur and I are back talking about why can't the Europeans lead?
Your own article, which I think, is going to be coming in the Boston Globe quite soon, talks about the role for Europe. So what is the role for Europe in this?
Again, I feel dangerously naive while we're having this discussion, Arthur. Like I'm a 19th century guy dipping my quill pen into ink to write a missive and send it. Pray tell, dear editor, please address this to, my adoring reading public. I'm so out of touch with the YouTube watching masses, which you, by the way, can follow the YouTube videos because we do have a YouTube channel. We may do it very poorly, but we at least try to do it, right? And I argue naively that Europe can be the mediating players. Trump may have done something symbolically good because no one got killed in this attack at Fordow, and because he warned the Iranians, there probably was no nuclear contamination.
Yeah.
Again, call me dangerously naive, but I think that's good.
Of course it's good.
They just made a signal. We're here. We symbolically have done this. Now let's, have a negotiation. Trump is not having the attention span to make that negotiation. He's not having the attention span and the willingness to make sacrifices. What if Starmer and Macron and Merz said, I'm having a conference. The Iranians are going to get $100 billion in reconstruction aid, and we're going to do this if they do this, and we're going to help Netanyahu turn over the administration of post-war Gaza to a Qatari-led pan-Arab coalition, and the Saudis will sign Abraham Accords 2.0 with Israel. This may sound like fantasy, but it's actually less fantasy than the world that we're living in, which isn't to say that our leaders will grab this, but it really is there for the taking. Or do you believe I'm missing something?
Well, I think the thing with these things, it's very easy to say, well, why would they do this and come up with the negative reasons. But obviously, it would be brilliant if a international consortium stepped in with Gaza, because then it would take away from Israel any need for it to continue what it's currently doing. I suppose what's not clear to me, because one of the things that we have with Netanyahu, and I think whilst it sounds very cynical, he is a very cynical person, is that he does need war. His political coalition is held together by the ongoing conflicts, not just clearly the one in Gaza, but increasingly, obviously, he's got Iran as a sort of second front. So that's one issue.
But the Europeans can call his bluff, sorry to interrupt here, because Israel's a democracy. If Merz, who has been actually quite pro-Israel.
Yeah, as you expect for a conservative German chancellor.
For sure. But he's been really,
yeah.
even for a conservative German chancellor, he has the right mood music.
Yeah.
If he said, we're dipping into our debt ceiling and we're going to be spending $100 billion on the defense of Israel and some high-tech collaborations, and we're doing this, and we are going to be sending German national service people to help in this monitoring of the border between Gaza and Israel. I think that there's an ability to call the bluff of the Israeli people because they have elections, they have an electorate, and the electorate doesn't love Netanyahu, and they would love the idea of not being a pariah state. I still think that there's room for genius maneuver when you're dealing with a democratic polity, 90% of which speaks perfect English. Even the Arabs speak perfect English, right? So you can make like a lot of plays that I don't grasp why it's like, well, we urge restraint. Because it's like everyone is just urging restraint. What is this even doing?
Yeah. Another aspect of this is the degree to which the Arabs want or care enough to be involved. Because obviously it's very easy for Gulf Arabs to say, the tragedy of the Palestinians and condemn Israel. And obviously in doing so, they've got they've got the so-called Arab street that they're dealing with. But actually, yes, the pockets are fairly bottomless when you're Saudi Arabia or Qatar, particularly with oil prices where they are climbing back up thanks to these wars. But what if you think, well, why should I pay for Gaza? It's not my problem.
But the Qataris have paid for it before.
Well, they paid to keep Hamas going. They didn't have to pay to rebuild every single building, did they?
They rebuilt a lot in 2006. Obviously, the destruction was infinitely less than now.
Yeah.
But there is an extent to which the Gulfies are good for their pocketbook. They do want to be seen as patrons, right?
Yeah. No, I think I know that's a fair point. So I guess another part of this story is the question of legality. Because I know that when we're talking about global disorder, something we all ought to care about is international law. Iran's reaction to these strikes may prove to be quite limited. We've seen, as you mentioned, there was a few missiles fired at Al Udeid, and almost a hint that the Iranians deliberately told the Americans it was coming,
100%.
and they did it at a level that it wasn't going to cause any damage, no one's going to die, it's all going to be fine. But let's say that's all that Iran does in retaliation. So we might say, well, this is great. We've got rid of the Iranian nuclear program. The retaliation was very limited. Everyone's a winner. What do Russia and China take away from this little episode?
I think they take away quite a bit about Western deterrence. Even this charade shows the extent to which the West is willing to act. Trump deployed the massive ordnance penetrator for the first time in live combat. He flew B-2s all the way from Missouri. I didn't realize that they could go without docking, I think that there is some deterrence that's established. The Israeli and Ukrainian ability, we've spoken about this, you and I, before, to use coordinated drone and intelligence attacks deep in enemy territory, that restores deterrence. If Netanyahu cannot be restrained and he just randomly continues to pursue an unwinnable war of regime change, that is just disordering, right? I wouldn't say it's not establishing just deterrence. It's just very disordering. That doesn't suit Western interests. We all know that in war, the tail can wag the dog. This is a known phenomenon, and I don't want to put my foot in certain memes and themes about the Israeli relationship with America, right? I don't think we are in a situation of the tail wagging the dog, and I think that Trump does make his own decisions. I would just like to pivot back to what you said about the Europeans. The Europeans are certainly not having their policies dictated to them by Israel. They are doing their own policies. Starmer is concerned about international law in this way and that way. The Germans about historical legacy. Macron about the threat from Marine Le Pen. Blah, 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 blah. You tell me, as someone who has worked in government in Europe, which I haven't, why is it that Europe as an entity is not made stronger when it realizes, oh my God, we're facing these different power poles. We have so much more similar interests. The UK and Norway and Switzerland and France and Poland, we may be different, but this is an example of a thing where we have tremendously similar interests, much more so than our American and Israeli and Gulfi partners.
Yeah, well, it's a great question, and it's almost a sort of fundamental question of European strategic military politics, over the last 75 years. As it happens, of course, with all the things, there's so many things happening. One of the many, many things happening at the moment is the NATO summit unfolding in the next few days. It appears that NATO members have committed to raise their defence spending to 5%.
Wow.
Now, the thing is, it's a commitment that may be easy to make and hard to deliver. And there may be decades taken to reach that target. And maybe that's not important. Maybe we can say, well, if everybody is on the road to the target, that's what matters. Of course, that's a number that's bigger than what America currently spends on its own defence. So it is future-proofing NATO possibly that it can operate, if not without America, certainly with a very limited American role. But I guess coming back to answer your question directly, I think one of the issues is that Europe still doesn't quite know what it wants. So as these attacks or the prospect of these attacks were unfolding, you had the UK desperate to be involved in some way, or at least desperate to show that it had a role to play. You have some countries desperate not to be involved at all. You have others quite keen to grandstand. So according to something I saw this evening, Macron has said that the US strike was illegal. Now, of course, that's a sort of grandstanding that is probably politically quite popular in France, where there is, of course, this sort of traditional skepticism of US military action. But this comes back to a point, it seems to me that the legality is debatable, right? It's quite hard to show that America was under imminent threat.
I'm going to put a link in the show notes. This is to my good friend and Oxford colleague, Ali Ibrahimi, who has written an article in Foreign Policy saying that in an international law perspective, the strikes were illegal from the preeminent preventative war doctrine. I don't know from international law, and when I talk about ordering the disorder, I'm not exactly referring to that. I find much more compelling the fact that Democrat attempts to impeach Trump on not having congressional approval are actually quite a hollow read, because there is the authorization of force for post 9/11 stuff, and Iran has funded terrorism, which has impacted American citizens. So there's legality there, and Israel has on its legal books the ability to go after the Iranians because they funded Hamas, who kidnapped their citizens. So I'm not a legal scholar and I can't adjudicate one way or the other, but I think that's the wrong argument. In other words, if I was a Democrat and I'm Alyssa Slotkin and I'm facing the mics, or I'm Adam Schiff, I would say, great, if he has an end game here for a peaceful solution, all for it. If this is bomb them so that the Israelis can then just make the next steps and we have no end game, I'm not for it. And the nitpicking, it would be a mistake if you were European and you're debating like what constitutes preemptive war as opposed to the congressional authorization of the use of force in the post 9/11. The question is like, we need a peace conference, right? So Arthur, would you order the disorder with me? Trump announced in his tweet, I love how everything is now on Truth Social tweets, on the assumption that everything works as it should, which it will. I would like to congratulate both countries, Israel and Iran, on having the stamina, courage, and intelligence to end what should be called the 12-day war, which I've got to hand it to the man because there is a certain humor. Because obviously 6-day war, 12-day war, congratulating both Israel and Iran. Usually wars don't get won by both sides, but there is a certain genius to the man, which I find it difficult to acknowledge, but I feel like I must because I just want him to maybe be able to make the peace that he's calling for in this tweet.
It's a really interesting point because for those of us who do not like Trump, and obviously there's you and me, and I'm sure almost all of the listeners to this podcast, absolutely, we should want him to make peace. And let's just say, as a thought experiment, that as a result of these hits on the Iranian nuclear program, that the program itself is severely damaged. Let's say it's not obliterated, they exaggerated, but it's severely damaged. It's put back by years. The Iranians, having also lost their proxy forces, we've got to be blunt that everything that can go wrong has gone wrong for the Iranians, as a result of which they do sue for peace. And they make some kind of a deal, which after all, a deal was in prospect. You had Steve Witkoff, Trump's negotiator, in discussions. So let's say all that happens. Yes, of course, as people that don't appreciate Donald Trump and his vulgarity and all that, there'll be things that we can find to criticize, but we should ultimately be big enough to say that he deserves the credit for having done that.
I think this is the critical thing. I don't want to be one of these, we just shit on the opponents and we try to back our team. This led to the defeat. This led to the selection of Kamala. This has led to a lot of the things that have gone wrong. And in the UK perspective, I think that it has led to the inability for some kind of post-Brexit consensus, right? Do you know what I mean? Just supporting your team has really, really led us in the West to a very tragic place. And the enduring disorder is about trying to find shared goals. So I see some shared goals here. I don't want an extreme neocon, we're going to do regime change in Iran, because you and I have had most of our adult lives working with the fact that it is impossible. Even if the regimes are totally evil and the people 80+% hate their current regime, it's not possible for the West to impose a new one, right?
Totally.
So
complete agreement.
We've lived it. Do you know what I mean? How many IEDs have you seen personally? I've seen 3.
Probably a similar number, maybe closer to 5, but you don't need to see more than one to know that you don't want to see more.
The point is that it's such a disordering phenomenon. We can't have Western troops or Israeli policymakers trying to impose a government on Iran. No. That's not the way that the world works. They will literally get the exact opposite of the government that they try to impose, right? I almost wonder if Netanyahu, in talking about regime change, is trying to do the opposite. You know what I mean? If they're like literally trying to make sure that the Ayatollahs stay in power.
Yeah. I mean, I think the risk of regime change in Iran, it's worth just saying a couple of things about that. For listeners might not all be aware, Iran's population is huge, over 90 million. There are serious armed separatist groups, long established. They haven't just
particularly along ethnic cleavages in Baluchistan, in Kurdistan. Yeah.
Exactly. So if you thought the Syrian civil war was bad, don't wait for the Iranian one. And that's why actually I could live with Donald Trump winning his Nobel Peace Prize, which it's sort of mysteriously so into getting it because it's the other winners are all people who are not his people. But anyway, he's desperate to get this prize. And actually, if he could bring peace between Israel and Iran, then good luck to him.
Just to wrap it up, 12-day war. I think that there are off-ramps here. Can Macron or Merz, from a technical perspective, insert themselves, convene a conference, say, we're all going to Doha, see you there?
Well, I think it's a great idea. And I think the Europeans do have, part of the issue with Europe today is that it needs leaders who have belief, self-belief, belief in Europe, so that they don't just sit on their hands and say, oh, there's nothing we can do. I guess the challenge is Netanyahu. Somebody has to talk Netanyahu down, persuade him that he's already achieved more than anyone's ever achieved, which is, after all, part of his sort of desire for legacy, and persuade him that he doesn't need to create regime change. And what he needs to do, actually, is to think about, in some way, being part of a peace conference.
Oh, from your mouth to God's ears. I think we're in violent agreement, actually, on these matters, Arthur. I hope you, the mega orderers, have enjoyed this rather impromptu emergency cast. What shall the listeners do if they would like to find out more?
Well, there is, of course, the Disorder Substack, which you should all read. If you've still got energy after that, you could read my Substack, which is called Not All Doom. And there's a lot of other great stuff out there. And ultimately, this is a fast-moving story, so stay alert, mega orderers.
Yes, as always, our producer is the one, the only, the George McDonough. We really enjoy being with the Evergreen Podcast Network. They've been giving us some excellent support. We have our YouTube channel, link in the show notes. We have that article on the legality of the war in FP from Ali Ibrahimi. Links to Arthur's really great Not All Doom Substack and very interesting podcasts, for example, the one he did with Charlie Gamble on Iran, there in the show notes. Okay, I'm not even going to wish you an orderly week because we know it's going to be a disorderly week. All I'm going to say is I just hope you can get some sleep. I can't, so please, listeners, I hope you can sleep, and I'll talk to you soon. Hello, mega orderers. We strive in partnership with the new production company Evergreen to create the best possible listening experience for you, the orderer. We appreciate your feedback about the show. We want to learn about you. What topics would you like? What kind of sponsors do you want to hear about? How we have a better experience? If you go to theshowsurvey.com/disorder, you can take a short anonymous survey and you will be entered in a drawing to win a $100 or £100 Amazon gift certificate. Again, that's theshowsurvey.com/disorder. Quick survey. It helps the show. And each week we will select a winner from participating. So you have a really high chance of winning. That's you, mega orderers. Go fill out the survey.
Are you tired of starting your day with pointless political arguments, superficial summaries, and lukewarm hot takes on the radio?
Then switch to The Bunker, where we look at the news without the nonsense.
Every weekday morning, The Bunker brings you a brand new, in-depth look at just one story.
From the chaos in Washington to the seismic political shifts in the UK.
To business, economics, history, and pop culture.
Or start your week, our essential Monday morning roundup of the week's upcoming stories.
We cut through the noise to bring you what matters.
That's The Bunker, news without the nonsense. Every weekday with me, Andrew Harrison,
Ross Taylor,
Jacob Jarvis,
Gavin Essler,
Sing Sing.
And me, Seth Jebble.
Find us wherever you get your podcasts.